Forged by the fires of our trials, refined by God's craftsmanship.
Hey everyone, welcome to Virilis. This is Tyler, and I'm here to hear Charlie's testimony because I know a little bit of it. We kind of talked about it before. I love how our testimonies are intertwined, and I'm excited to learn more about his story. So I'm here to ask you, Charlie. Charlie, tell me about how you got connected with God and how He's been leading you, man.
Well, it was quite a wild ride, to say the least. A lot of twists and turns and sometimes roadblocks too, I guess you could say. Growing up, I didn't really have much of a religious background. Both of my parents had experiences with the church. My father grew up Catholic and my mother grew up a Methodist. But both of them have had had bad experiences with the congregation of the churches that they were at. So they felt that if they do want to pursue a relationship with God, it's got to be on your terms. So they tried to stay away from religious institutions as much as possible, and they encouraged us to. My sister and I encouraged us to find our own way to a relationship with God, which doesn't really give much of a direction. But, and spiritually speaking, it had me tread a lot of spiritual waters that were pretty dangerous, actually. It was almost on the border of like knocking on the devil's door. I mean, there was really, looking into the zodiac, but also practicing with a Ouija board too. So that's it. I could find myself really going into dark places whenever going into that, and it eventually did not lead me in a direction that had any type of purpose at all. When I finally got into when I graduated high school and got into community college, all I really wanted to do was theater, but I also wanted to try to do a backup. I had no idea what that was, so I was basically chasing my tail for a number of years, just trying to keep myself busy with theater that was not really going anywhere, sadly enough, even though it did help me come out of my shell a little bit more. Growing up, I was a shy kid, and I also grew up with Asperger's syndrome, which, as some of you may or may not know, is a bit of a social disorder. It's hard to really relate to people or even have I guess you could say a one-on-one conversation that is more of a two-way street instead of a one-way street where it's just one person talking. So with that, I was really going nowhere, and it eventually led me down to a path of depression that actually had me contemplate suicide. It was a point where it's kind of that point where you feel like that you're not really doing anything that is worthwhile. You're a burden on those who are in your circle, the people that you care about, family members the most. And you start to contemplate, what if you took yourself out of the equation? Would it make other people's lives easier? And that was actually around the time when I was contemplating the method and almost following through with the method that I first heard God's call on my life. It's just the still small voice that you hear in the back of your mind. It's like it was saying to me, just as I was about to do the deed, I just fumbling on my words here. I'm just kind of talking.
Can I slow you down for a second? Because
Yeah.
This is really like heavy stuff.
It is.
Yeah. Are you comfortable sharing with how you wanted to do the deed?
Let's just say that it involved a firearm.
Wow. Were you holding it?
I was holding it underneath my chin, and as I was about ready to squeeze the trigger, that's when the voice came in. In the back of my mind, it's like, you don't have to do this. Everything is going to be fine.
Mm.
And for those of you watching this, I would hope and pray that you would not experience this. I mean, the sensation of all of it, the smell of the gun oil, the cold steel underneath your chin, I just hope and pray that you don't experience that. But God knew how to reach me in those circumstances, so it worked. I put it away, and I just went on, even though I didn't necessarily know what direction it would lead me. A couple of months later, it was not too far away from my house that my dad got into a motorcycle accident, and his life was really on the line. And he also had a friend that was a pastor of this small church that was in the next city. So his congregation prayed for him. And that's when I finally got introduced to an official church body. And I felt God really calling me to be a part of a community, but I wasn't part of a community that I can really relate to. It was a very small church, roughly about 2, maybe even 3 dozen people at the most. And it was mostly people that were older than me. They were roughly about my parents' age, or they were on the verge of retirement. So couldn't really talk to anybody who can relate to my experiences at that time, so that we can, endure the struggle together. So as I was continuing my studies at community college, I eventually ran into the person who would later on be my wife. I was rehearsing a skit in the amphitheater. She was on her way from a math class, romantic there, and
nothing like that math class.
I know, right? But then she saw us performing, and she recognized one of our classmates, and she figured, hey, got some time to kill, free theater. She just sat in the bleachers. We got acquainted, and the rest is history. And the more we became interested in each other, I expressed my interest in her, and she really challenged me. She said, I can only be with a person who loves Jesus more than I do. And it was a bit of a tall order for me, and it actually almost scared me out of not really calling her the next day. But, I thought to myself, what have I got to lose? I mean, I've tried everything else to try to relate to people on my level in the same age range as far as talking about God. And I never really knew God. I knew that he was there, but I never really knew who he was as a person, namely Jesus Christ. So we talked about it more, and it was in the book of John that I really got to see God through Jesus Christ, who he really was. And I saw someone who I related to. It was in John chapter 4. It was the Samaritan woman, when Jesus had an encounter with her at the well and really talking to her. And for those of you who don't know, around that time period, women were seen as the lowest of the low. And especially this woman, who was a Samaritan, who was an outsider of in this circle, and she was one who wasn't very morally inclined either. She had 5 husbands, and the one who she was with was not her husband at all. So she was an outsider in every aspect. And I thought to myself, this woman is an outsider just like I was, or at least I felt like was at the time. And this is the first person that Jesus revealed himself as the Son of God, the Messiah. And I thought to myself, if God loves us so much to reveal himself to the lowest of the low, regardless of who you are or what you've done, he could definitely love someone like me. And that's when I knew that I had to go all in a relationship. So being with my wife, we were dating at the time, we grew closer. Even though there were some bumps in the road, we actually were separated for a number of months, a fast from each other, if you will. And then we got reacquainted. And then eventually 6 years later, right to the day, we got married. He would know, he was there. He was my best man.
Yeah.
But then, you pretty much know the whole story from the previous episode, if you have watched it, how we got reconnected, through being baptized on the same day.
Yeah.
And then it eventually led to, the events that led up to this point was, us working together, hosting several groups, and, eventually thought, there aren't that many groups that really talk about biblical manhood, let alone podcasts that do this. And that's something that I've noticed that is missing in today's culture, that real men are those who, and this is something that Dr. Tony Evans has pointed out, real men are those who initiate in the home and in the culture the application of truth in every circumstance of life. And that is something that every man needs to be aware of. It's their responsibility to do that, whether you're a husband or a father or all of the above. That is the role that God has put on your life. If you are a husband or a father, that is your ministry. And that's something that really drew me to really want to start this podcast or even shoot the idea. I mean, to be honest, I didn't really think that it would fly. But then the more that we were talking about it, and you were so excited to really talk about it. And it's like, let's do it. And now here we are. We're sitting in front of these microphones and these cameras, and we're making it happen.
Yeah, and thank you for being willing to do that, and thank you for being open with what God's put on your heart. Because, like you said in your testimony, we were intertwined. Something I forgot in my testimony is something that we actually have in common is both of our significant others. I didn't mention this in my testimony. The girl who said, you can't date with me unless you go to church with me is now my wife. And both of our significant others sort of put that sort of challenge to us. We both answered the call. Yeah. And that's the way I think God operates. He puts people in our lives for a reason, I think.
Sometimes it could be a potential spouse, or it could be anybody. If God really does love you, he will put a spouse in your life. I mean, someone would say, how is it that you know that God is speaking to you? Well, your spouse would tell you. So,
and not just your spouse either.
You got to do a podcast. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Not just your spouse, but your friends too. Charlie, you're my friend. And there's this period of my life where I'm experiencing a lot of challenges, I would say, with the work I do. And just what we've been talking about these past few months is exactly what I need in my life. And God gives you what you need when you need it. And here it is.
Something that I didn't mention in my testimony is that being in theater, it's like a mixed bag of nuts. It's so many different backgrounds, so many different upbringings, and also different cultures, if you will, that can have some dark spiritual pedigrees to it. So it's it was really good for me to get out of that scene.
Yeah. Charlie, we're reaching the end of this flight. Anything else you want to tell our audience before we land it?
Yeah. So in our next set of podcasts, we'll let you know when those go up once we get our website with the link to different devotionals that would help you enhance your quality of life and your relationship with God, and eventually maybe even start something for people in your circle, maybe even a group yourself. But in the meantime, goodbye and Godspeed. See ya. Thank you for watching this episode of Virilis Podcast. If you want to listen to any more of our episodes, you could go to our website. You can also check out for any devotionals that we have that would prove useful to you or anybody else in your circle. Also, if you want to get started on a group of your own, you could download the blueprints and any other content that would prove useful to you. Until then, good luck and Godspeed.